those numbers to say, I think something is going on. Can you please send somebody to investigate? If you're afraid to do it, you can do it anonymously, because what we're doing here is saving children's lives. And so if you're afraid to get involved, which I understand also, don't hesitate to call, because we can still come in, do an investigation. And if nothing is going on, all right, so you get a little bit of a hardship for the parents because everybody gets involved in their lives for a few weeks. But you know what? If something is going on, you might be the one that saved that child's life.
Well, during our conversation, exactly what you just mentioned there was, it's important for the whole community to get involved. We have a chain, and we're all links in that chain. If there's a break in the chain, one of those links are broken, then we'll never ever get to the end. And we have to protect each other. It's a community. We need to work as a unit, a group, so we can make a difference. We have to watch out. That's something that's lacking in our community today. We have besides having a dysfunctional family, we really have a dysfunctional community.
Yes.
And we're starting to develop a dysfunctional nation. So it's starting to become global, and that's becoming a problem with our country right now. Now, if we have a patient that comes to you, and let's say you suspect child abuse, some sort of abuse, how would you treat that?
Okay. I usually ask all the questions about what happened to the child, try to get a good history as to how the injury occurred. And if I'm not satisfied with what I hear, my next step is to say, you know, I'm not sure that what you're saying is what I feel is happening with this child. I had a child who had injuries to both sides of the head. Mom said she had vomited, slipped and fell and hit her head on the left side of the bed. Well, that doesn't make any sense because she wouldn't have an injury on both sides from hitting one side of her head. So that was a pretty obvious one. And so what I would do is just question and re-question and re-question until I'm satisfied that something is going on wrong here. And then my next step is to call in a social worker. And so we bring in a social worker to come in and do her investigation, and then together we file a report to ACS. And I've called the police on several occasions when I think there's some real abuse here and I'm afraid that the parent is going to take the child out of my hands and I won't be able to protect that child. I have called the police and stopped that from happening, but those are very rare and extreme cases. What I find is that most parents, the ones that I've dealt with, are not really abusers. They just have so many things going on. They're short-tempered. They lost it for a minute and they've caused some type of harm. Well, those parents need to have some kind of parenting training and skills. It's not about removing kids, it's not about breaking up families, it's about allowing parents to raise their children with all of the resources that we have available to them.
Right. So part of that would be, again, the educational component,
yes,
the communication component, and you need to enrich the lives with the necessary tools. A lot of, like you said, it's the coping mechanism that needs to be addressed. Once, again, if it happens to be a teenager having children having children, we need to educate and embrace them and give them the necessary tools, then we can move on. But we also treat the underlying, if there's any pathology that's involved, we do treat that as well.
Exactly.
You know, that, again, this child safety first. We must protect that child.
Correct.
A point we'd like to address is, one, we can hold the child, call 911. If we suspect that the child's life is at risk, we have the right and authority to call 911, hold the child until police arrive.
That's correct.
Or if we suspect the child's life is at risk, we can call 911, have the police pick the child up and bring that child directly to the ER. And we can hold the child in the ER until the proper authority arrives. So we do have that ability. But fortunately, I've never seen that, and I have not been placed in that position, and I thank God for that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I have. And the reasons why I would call the police is if I feel their child is in danger and that the parents are not cooperating. And then I have no alternative because, as I said before, I'm a child advocate. And we're there to protect children who cannot speak for themselves.
Right.
And so when we see that that's happening, then it's our responsibility to ensure that that child is safe. And unfortunately, if that takes removing the child from the household, then that will happen. And we have no qualms about letting that happen also, or making sure that that happens if we're going to save a child's life. And we said before, you hear everybody say it takes a village to raise a child. But one of the things I was telling OB earlier is it takes a village to save a child.
That's correct. Everyone has to look out for each other. You know, if you hear something, you know, especially if you're living in the inner city, we're living in apartment buildings. If you hear strange noises, if you're hearing something, fighting, yelling, you hear things, something heavy hitting the floor, you hear crying, and all of a sudden something, you don't hear anything, you should pay attention, because that might be signs, symptoms of something more serious
going on.
Right. And again, if you want to report, you can report anonymously. So don't feel that if I report, they're going to go after me. You can make an anonymous phone call. We have a hotline, I think with 311.
Yes, you can call 311 and they'll connect you to the child safety numbers, and you don't have to give your name or your number. You know, if you want to, you can call from a public phone so they won't get your number, and just tell them this is what I think is going on. And again, if nothing is happening in that household, we will come in, ACS will come in, and they'll do an investigation, and if there's nothing going on, about 1/3 of those calls are nothing. You know, people get called because they're concerned, thank God someone takes the time to call, and they turn out to be nothing.
Right.
So it doesn't hurt to have, you know, it uses up a lot of resources, but it's what we have to do to ensure that people get safe. It's like what we used to say about appendicitis. You know, surgeons will come in and they go in and they operate, they think the child has appendicitis, and there's a certain number of normal appendix that we expect the surgeon to take out. If that surgeon is not taking out at least 10% of those normal appendixes, then we say there's something wrong because they're not watching carefully enough.
We always say rather be safe than sorry.
And that's the same with us.
Yes, you have to protect. Again, you're protecting a community, because your greatest assets are going to be your children, because they're going to be the leaders of the future.
That's correct.
After we do an assessment, and you do a thorough history and physical and make an assessment, and you diagnose some sort of child abuse. Remember, we went over 4 categories. You have emotional abuse, you have physical abuse, you have child neglect. Once we diagnose, how do you treat it?
Okay, it's a very good question. Once we diagnose child abuse in a child, that child has to be removed if the perpetrator is in the home. If it's someone that lives in that house, that child is removed. If it's the mother, the child is removed. If it's the father and he's still in the household, the child is removed. If it's a relative or a friend that comes to the house and there's no way to protect that child is removed. Once that child is removed, it's put into the foster care system. We like to put them in kinship care with some kind of family member who's willing to take it, the grandmother or an aunt or an uncle. And though those kids, once they're in foster care, get seen by regular providers. When I was working in Brooklyn with the Coalition of Hispanic Family Services, we were a medical provider for ACS, which meant that all the foster care kids that were in our catchment area were assigned to me and through the Salvation Army in Bushwick. And so I provided all the care for those kids. And so not only did I prepare to make sure that they were physically okay, we had an Article 31 clinic where we had social workers, we had psychiatrists, we had psychologists, we had people who then have to treat the well-being of that child. And we work towards reuniting that family because we want to make sure that those kids are in with people who love them. There are people who love them in those families, regardless of what we think. It's usually one member who's being abused by one person in the family, if it's a family member or a friend, which it usually is, someone that you know. And once we establish the safety of that child, we work towards reuniting that family. If we see that the parent who is legally responsible for that child is unable to get back into being a productive citizen, for example, if that person is in drug use or unable to bring themselves up to par, that the rights of those parents are removed, and those kids are then up for adoption. Because our concern is for the well-being of the society and the community, but as pediatricians and family practitioners, our goal is to make sure that the children are safe, and that's what we try to do.
Primary goal. Now, I know you already addressed this. Well, let's one more time so everyone has an understanding that you can make that phone call anonymously. For more information about the X Akatamio Show, please go to my website. That's www.communityhealtheducation.com.